So in our last session, we have started discussing Entity Framework Core, and we have discussed what exactly Entity Framework Core, how you can install the required packages from NuGet, and how you can create the context class, and how you can use that context class to access the or to communicate with the database. And one more thing we have discussed in our last session that using this unconfiguring method of this DbContext object, right, we are configuring the connection string, and here you can see we have hard coded the connection string. Do you think that this is a good programming approach of hard coding the connection string directly within the application code? Is this
No,
a good approach? No, because see,
no, no,
because we need to get the connection string some kind of configuration files, right? If you are working with earlier .NET framework, then you might be know there is something called web config file, or you might be if you are working with any kind of a desktop application like console application, right, Windows Form application. In that case, you will having something called app config file, right? So from up within either within the app config file or web config file, based on the different kind of application you develop, there you need to put the connection string, and from that right connection from that configuration file you need to read the connection string, right? And we are right, and this is the best approach. Why? Because if we are moving from right one server to another server, if you want to change the database right from one database name to different database, then in that case we are not going to right change the server details within our application code. So we just need to write what I can say. We just need to update the connection string within the config file, right? And for that, in that case, we do not need to rebuild the application. We do not need to write publish the application, and we do not require the redeployment, right? So because to avoid such kind of things, right? Read publishing, redeploying, right? What we need to do, we need to create the connection string in the web config file. Another important thing is that, right? We should not write if you are working with any kind of a real-time applications, right? Then you do not have that database credential. You do not know, right, what is the username, what is the password that you can use to connect with the database, right? Because of the security purpose, right? On the production environment, you will not get access to the actual credential. So that is the responsibility of the DBA team. They will provide the credential to some senior manager, right, or the person who is deploying the who is taking the responsibility of the deployment activity, right, who are having access to the production environment. They will only get the credential from the right where from the DBA team, and you just need to tell them that this is the section within my configuration file where you need to update the connection string, and those kind of things are happening in real time, right? On the development, you need to check the database. For that purpose you should have the credential, but on production you do not have that credential, right? On production you cannot have access to the database directly, right? So for the security purpose, you will need to put the connection string on a environment, right, which can be updated without redeployment, right? Without redeploying your application, you need that flexibility. If anybody wants, they can change the connection string in the configuration file. So let us try to understand, but see how you can put that connection string in a configuration file, and how you can read that connection string from the configuration file. If you look at this console application, unlike the .NET Framework console application, we do not have that flexibility here. Did you see that the app settings.json file here? No, app settings.json file is only available in the web application, not on the console application. So let us try to understand how we can use that app settings.json file in our right console application. But by default, this is not provided. We can install it in a different way, right? So to install that app settings.json file, or if you want to create any kind of a JSON file in your application, then what you need to do, first of all, you need to install this package from the NuGet, right? So guys, remember, ASP.NET Core is a modular approach. ASP.NET Core follows the modular approach. Modular approach means what? Now, what is the minimum thing required to develop the application? That is only going to be provided to you. As you progress, if you need any more things, right? Any new things you want, that you can install from the NuGet, right? Until and unless, for example, if you are developing application database connection string is not required, you do not need to install this one. Why you are going to install this one if it is not required? But if you are developing the ASP.NET Core, ASP.NET Framework application, then in that case, these things are automatically available. But here, these things are not automatically available as per your requirement. You need to install them manually from NuGet. Let us try to install this package from the right from the NuGet package manager console. So right click on this tools menu, then select NuGet package manager for solution, right? So in your application, if you want to create any kind of a JSON file, then you need to install this Microsoft.extension.configuration.json file. Once it, once you select this, select the project where you need to install this JSON file and then click on this install button. So once you click on this install button, that the preview changes window will come, right, which will show you what are the changes it is going to do on your application, or what are the right files that are being downloaded to your application. Just click on the OK button, right? That's it. Once you can see the finished button means the package is installed successfully, right? To confirm whether the package is installed or not, just go to the packages folder, which you can find inside the dependency folder, and you can see this is the package being installed, and you can see these are the related files which are being downloaded along with this JSON file. So once this is done, next what we need to do, we need to create a JSON file, right? So once you install this one, then what we need to do, you need to create the offsettings.json file. So how to create the offsettings.json file? See, it's very simple, right? So it's very simple. So what we need to do, we just need to right click on our project, right? Let me close this one. Right click on our project, then select add new item. So just select add new item. And once you select add new item, then search for your JSON. Because, right, we want to create a JSON file. So here you can see TypeScript and JavaScript, but we are interested in TypeScript.json file, right? So JavaScript, sorry, we are interested in JavaScript JSON configuration file and provide the name, right? Offsettings.json. Guys, remember, it is not mandatory to give this file name as offsettings.json. Whatever name you want, you can give. But as per the standard of ASP.NET Core, if any kind of settings which you want to available throughout your application, irrespective of the environments, right? Then you need to put those files, right? Those settings, those global variables, those informations within the app settings.json file. But it is up to you. Whatever name you want to give, you can give, right? But I'm following the standard naming convention. So I'm providing the name as app settings.json and then click on the OK button, right? So once you click on the OK button, you can see this by default this section is one file is created offsetting.json. Now what we need to do, once this file is created, right, we need to update these things, right? What do we need to update these things. So we are updating, right? So what we need to do, we need to store the connection string within that file. So what I'm doing, I'm just copying this connection string information, right? And then I'm putting that connection string information here, right? So you can see I have provided the connection string details. So the connection string detail is provided, right? Just copy here and paste it here. Guys, remember here I have used at the rate symbol. So one slash is fine. But if whenever I copy, I have not used the at the rate symbol. So automatically the double slash is provided here, right? If you put a single slash, then it will give you error. Or in this case, not error, warning. So, right, you need to use this double slash. So once this connection string is created, then what we need to do, right? So first of all, you need to understand a few things. First of all, you need to understand where the connection string is available. Guys, tell me where the connection string is now available within the which file? Which file containing the connection string?
App
App
setting.
App
setting.json.
settings.
App settings. Inside app settings, there are, you can create many sections. Like this is connection string section, right? Then you can create some other sections, right? Some, right? Some section one, right? You can create some section to like this. You can create any number of sessions, right? Any number of sections. So in this app settings data JSON file, which section contains the connection string, right? In this case, you can consider some key one, right? Some key two, right? So where the connection string is available within the app settings JSON file. Within the app settings and app settings.json file, we are having many sections. Which sections contains the connection string? Guys, tell me which section
Connection strings.
on connection string section contain the connection string. It might also be possible that you might be have multiple connection, right? If your application is communicating with a right different databases, right? SQL Server connection, then you can have MySQL. Suppose your application is communicating with the two different databases, then you might be have two different connection string. Yes or no? Yes
Yes,
or
sir.
no?
Yes.
Right. But currently, if you want to communicate with the SQL Server database, then what key contains the SQL Server connection string in our
SQL.
example? SQL Server connection. So guys, remember we need to understand the three things: where the connection string is available, and what section the connection string is available. What should be the key using which we can access the connection string? So three things we need to understand. Let us try to understand these three things, right? So now the question is how to fetch the connection string from the app settings.json file. So first of all, you need to import this namespace, right? Microsoft dot extensions dot configurations. Using this configuration, we can access the configurations, right? So first of all, what we need to do, we need to load the configuration file. So load the configuration file means first of all, we need to load app settings.json file because this file contains the connection string. And to load the right app settings.json file, what we need to write? We need to create an instance of a configuration builder. Using the add JSON file, we need to add the connection, right? We need to load the connection, right? We need to load the JSON file which contains the connection string. And to this add JSON file method, what we need to do, we need to provide the file name which contains the connection string, and then simply call the build method which will do us the required thing. So this build method is going to load the connection string from the configuration file, and that connection string, right, now you can access using this config builder method. So this first statement, whatever we have written here, is nothing but it is going to load the connection string data, right? Load the connection string file into our application, right? So once the connection string, right, once the JSON file is loaded, right? Once the JSON file is loaded, then what we need to do? We need to get the connection string section. We need to get the section where the connection string is actually stored. So to get the section, right, what we need to do, you need to use this config builder method, which is nothing but you can consider this is the app settings.json file. And within this app settings.json file, we need to go to the section with the name connection string. So what is the section name you have provided here? That name you need to give here. So we are getting that
एक
section info. Sorry,
अंक देखने में 1 घंटा निकल जाता है.
please mute yourself, guys, while I'm explaining. Okay. So you can see, guys, this is nothing but we are getting to the connection string section. So whichever section contains the connection string, that section name you need to pass. First of all, you need to load the JSON file. Second, you need to go to the section which contains the JSON file, sorry, connection string. So once we get the connection section or configuration section, right, then what we need to do, you can get the data, right, by using the indexer or by using the get value method, right? By using the string indexer, you can say I'm using this is SQL Server connection. This is nothing but your indexer name. You can access this using the name, this name, right? Whatever the name, that what you need to provide, and you will get the connection string. Other part is there. You can make use of this get value generic method. So while you are using get value method, you need to tell this connection string is of which type, whether it is a Boolean type value, whether it is an integer type value, or whether it is a string type value. That information you need to give to this generic get value method. So, but as you can see, this connection string is a string type of value. So I have provided this. And here what I'm doing, now if this value is null, I'm using this null, right? So making this value as a null. So instead of null, what you can do is you can hardcode the connection string, right? If there is no connection string with this name available, right? And you want to make sure that if this section is missing, I want to use a default connection string. That default connection string value you can provide here, right? So let us try to understand this. Let us try to modify our entity framework or context class. So right to understand these things, right? First of all, you need to, right? First of all, what you need to do, first of all, you need to import this statement, right? Import the Microsoft.extension.configuration namespace, because without using this configuration namespace, we cannot create an instance of this configuration builder, right? So first step is to load the configuration file, and the syntax is this one. We have already discussed. So this is nothing but your file name. Second thing is we need to get the section, we need to get the configuration section. So using this configuration builder method, call the get section method, pass the section name, right? The section name, whatever the configuration section you want to access, that what name. Once you have this thing, right, then you can use the string indexer, or you can use, right, this, what I can say, you can also use this config section dot get value, not configuration. This is config section. Why I'm getting this error? Why I'm getting this error? Configuration section dot config section.
Get
Okay.
section. That
Get
get section.
section. Sorry.
That get section that we need to use there.
Okay. Dot get value. No, it is not going to work. Okay. Okay, forget about it. I will come to this part later, right? What exactly the best way, right? But now you can use this one, right? So basically, using this config section, we can provide the string indexer name, and we can get the data, right? So once you get the connection string, then what you need to do, you just need to call this use SQL Server method, and you need to provide the connection string, right? So is that clear, guys? How you can get the connection string details, right? Using the configuration file. So you need to load the JSON file, get the section, access the key.
Sir,
Clear, guys, or any question?
yes, sir. Some of the application they are not using within the app setting this connection string, right?
And some of the application means if you are developing any console application, this file is not there. But if you are developing any web applications like ASP.NET Core, MVC, Blazor, right, Razor Pages, Web API application, then this file will be there.
So within the web application only they are fetching the data from the database. So is there
Right,
any
right.
alternative? Yeah?
See, it doesn't matter. See, if you are developing a web application, this app settings file will automatically provided to you by the Visual Studio, right? While you are developing the application, the process is going to be same, right? Even though you are having the app settings.json file, you can access the data like this.
Yeah.
Right? So in this case, we are loading the file and all these things, right? But these things will not be available, right? We'll discuss, right? Don't worry. We'll discuss how we can get the connection string in our ASP.NET Core web applications, right? That is for definitely once we discuss this basic concept, right? Core concept. Once you start using Entity Framework Core in our ASP.NET for ambient web API application. At that time, definitely I'm going to tell you how you can access the connection string from different settings, right? From app settings, from user secret, from command line argument. All these things are available. We will discuss one by one. Clear?
Okay. Okay. Okay.
So for now, right? So basically, what my intention is, so we can hard code this connection string, but instead of hard coding the connection string, how we can fetch the data from a configuration file. That is what I'm trying to explain you. And why I'm creating this? Because by default, this app settings.json file is not provided to us. So we need to create this file. We need to load this file. We need to get to the section and access the values. That is what we need to understand. Clear, guys? Right?
Yes, sir.
So next, what I'm going to do, right? Don't modify anything. Let us try to run this application and see what happens, right? So at this point, if you run the application, right, then you will get one error, right? So let us try to run the application and see what exactly happening. So you can see what error we are getting. We are getting the error, the configuration file appsettings.json was not found and is not optional. The expected physical path was the color project, whatever the name, being debug .NET 6.0 appsettings.json file. So what exactly he is telling that you are using a file called appsettings.json file, and while we are trying to access that file is not available within the following physical path. And right, which physical path? In debug .NET 6.0 app settings. Now, if I go to this folder location, right, pin debug .NET 6.0, then there is no app settings.json file. And this is the reason why it is throwing this exception. That means what? That means we have added this file and we are using that file. But once the application is once the application is compiled, that file is not available at the particular location. Why it is not available? How we can overcome this problem? Because we have not included, I have added this file, but we have not tell to the to the right .NET Core framework to add this file to that particular location, right? Whenever we compiled the code, right? So how we can tell this thing to do this? Right click, go to the properties, right? And then you can see copy to output directory, do not copy. So instead of a do not copy, right? So what we need to do, we need to use something else, right? So what we need to do, we need to use copy always, right? So you can see there is an option called copy always, right? So once you do these changes, save the settings, right? And now build the solution, right? Let me first build the solution, rebuild the solution, and check whether that file is created on the particular directory or not. Bin debug .NET 4, and you can see now the offsetting.json file is available here, right? So once this file is available, now it can read the data, right? So once this file is available, let me run the application and see whether it is working now or not. Yes, you can see first name, last name, and all these things are getting created, right? Okay, so this is a different code, and yes, it is working now, right? So the point that you need to remember is, guys, our application is working as expected. We can hard code the connection string as well as we can get the connection string from the configuration file. So how to read? You can read the connection string from a configuration file as well. For that, we need to follow the steps. Clear, guys?
Yes, yes.
Okay. Next, what we are going to discuss. Next, we are going to discuss how we can perform the CRUD operations, right? So, how we can perform the CRUD operation. So, CRUD operation means it is the combination of four operations. One is creating a new entity, retrieving the data from the database, updating the existing entity, and deleting an entity from the database. And guys, remember, we can perform these things in two different scenarios, right? We can perform the this connection, right, CRUD operation in connected and disconnected scenarios, right? So, can anybody tell me what do you mean by connected scenario and a disconnected scenario? Because this is not new in entity framework 4. It is already available in entity framework. So, Can anybody tell me what we mean by connected and disconnected scenarios? Anybody having any idea?
Connected in the sense it is always connected to the database. The flow will be there. That means the live data will be reflected whenever we are doing the changes or anything. But disconnected in the sense it is completely the database. Whatever the database is, whatever the operation are happening on the database is independent from the whatever data that we are doing in the operation. Like uh, there will be instance of the copy of the data will be there in our system, and we are working on it. But connected architecture, automatically the data, whatever we are operation doing, they're directly reflecting on the live database.
No, that is not partially true. That is not completely true. So what do you mean by connected and
Connected
disconnected
means
data?
if you are using data set,
No,
it is a
no,
connected
no,
architecture.
no. See, so first guys, you just tell me who is responsible for doing all these kind of operations. If I'm communicating with the database, which object is the most important one in our case? The DbContext class, or without the DbContext class, can you do anything?
No, sir.
No.
So connected environment or connected scenario means, right? So first of all, if I'm using the same DbContext class or same DbContext instance to fetch the data, and using the same DbContext class, if I'm updating the data and then saving the updated data into the database, that means using a single DbContext instance, if I'm performing all the database kind of operations, then it is nothing but your connected environment or connected scenario. What do you mean by disconnected scenario? Disconnected scenario means using using one of the DbContext instance, I retrieve the data, update the data, but for modification I'm using a different DbContext instance, right? That means if more than one DbContext instance are coming into the picture for performing the database CRUD operations, then in that case we need to say that this is a disconnected environment or disconnected scenario. So is it possible that using one DbContext instance I can retrieve the data, using a different DbContext instance I can update the data into the database? Yes, that is possible. And that is nothing but your disconnected environment, right? So examples, whatever you given, that is correct, right? Using, first of all, we need to retrieve the data. We can store the data in memory using data set, data table, right? Whatever you want, you can, wherever you want, you can store. But again, the same data you want to store, right? You want to update into the database but while you are going to update the data into the database, again, you need a context class, right? That means if you are using more than one DbContext instance to perform the CRUD operation, this is nothing but your disconnected scenario or a disconnected environment. Is that clear?
Yeah, clear.
Sir, will
Right.
it be any difference, sir, if you use multiple DB context classes?
So difference, definitely difference will be there, right? So you just tell me if I'm creating an instance one time and if I'm creating an instance two times, which is going to, for the same purpose, which is going to take more time.
Yeah, creating multiple instances only.
But another scenario I'm saying, suppose the right, I'm creating one instance, means it is going to consume some memory, yes or no?
Yes, yes.
And if I'm right, if I'm not deleting that instance, if I'm not clearing the right, if I'm not making that garbage collected, and if that will be stay for a longer period of time without the using, right? Suppose, for example, I just need to create an instance of the context class. I need to retrieve the data, but then I'm going to do some different kind of operations. But that different kind of operation doesn't require the context object. So, do you think that keeping that instance active for a longer period of time is a good approach? Yes or no? Suppose I created one instance and I access the data from the database, but after then I'm calling two function, three function, doing some other activity where the database instance is not required. So do you think that keeping that instance active for a longer period of time is a good programming approach?
No, sir.
Right, so that basically depend, right? So basically sometimes using one instance gives you better performance. Sometimes one instance giving you poor performance. Sometimes two instances, right, giving you better performance. Sometimes creating two database instances gives you poor performance, right? So basically, you need to decide what is your requirement. Whether for this requirement, one instance is good or two instances is good, which is going to give you better performance. You need to decide, and accordingly you need to use, right? So saying frankly that one instance giving better performance, two instances, right, connected environment is going to give better performance, disconnected environment is going to give better performance, we can say blindly. So we need to take the scenario into considerations, and then we need to identify which scenario is suitable for my right, for my requirement. Like for example, suppose from method one I access the data from the database, right? While I'm accessing the data from the database, I use context object one. And those data I pass to method two. And method two do some kind of updation. Then method two wants to update the same data into the database. Then in that case, what you need to do in method one, you need to use one object, access the data. That's it. Method two, you need to create another instance of the DbContext and you need to update the data into the database. So basically, based on the scenario, you need to choose what exactly you need to do, right? Definitely, right? Once we progress, then I will definitely show you the example of both the connected environment as well as a disconnected environment and how you can use both to perform the database CRUD operations. So in this session, right, I'm going to keep focus on the connected environment. Later, right, as we progress, I will show you how you can perform the database CRUD operation using a disconnected environment. Clear, guys?
Yes, sir.
Right. See, these are the very, very important things, right, that you need to understand, right? Without understanding this concept, right, you cannot write robust code. So let us try to understand how we can perform the database CRUD operations, right? So database CRUD operation means, first of all, you need to understand, right? Right. So you need to understand what are the different entity states. Entity states means, so if you go to the entity state class, right? So if I go to this program class, if I write entity state, and if I bring the namespace in picture, right? So if you go to this class, then you will see there are five right, different states of an entity. Again, entity state I will discuss in detail, right, after some time. You can see there are five different states. That means whenever we create an entity, that entity is going to be in any of these five states. It might be in detached, unchanged, deleted, added, and modified. So based on the current state of the entity, right, the corresponding SQL statement is going to be generated by DbContext object, or you can say database provider. If the entity state is in added state, right? And guys, remember, if the entity state is in added state, then insert statement is going to be created. If entity state is in modified state, then update statement. Entity state is in deleted state, means what? The delete SQL statement is going to be generated whenever an entity state is unchanged. Then in that case, nothing is going to be happen. And for detached means the entity framework core is not tracking that object anymore. Means in that case, it is not going to do anything also, right? So if you look at these things, right? So basically, for unchanged, it is not going to do anything, and for detached, it is not tracking the object anymore. You can see the entity is not being tracked by the context. If it is not being tracked by the context, means what? Now this right entity with this state is not going to be it not having any relation with the context object, and all other four states means the context object is tracking. So tracking means what? Tracking means what? Now whenever you retrieve one object, what is its state? Do you modify any of the properties? If you modify the properties, whichever properties you are modifying, right? If I'm going to update the data, how I'm going to update the data, right? All these informations are going to be tracked by the context object, right? And based on the tracking information, whenever you call the SaveChanges method, right, then based on the current entity state, the corresponding, right, the corresponding SQL statement is going to be generated. For example, right, if your entity is in the added state, then insert statement is going to be generated and executed on the database. If your entity state is modified, then update statement is going to be generated and executed on the database. And same in the case of a deleted. right? So the point that you need to remember is that in the connected scenario, an instance of a DbContext class keep track of all the entities, right? So if you are working with a connected environment, then the DbContext class keep track of all the entities, whether the entity is created, modified, or deleted, and automatically it sets the state for an entity, right? Automatically, if you created one entity, automatically it is going to set the entity state as added. If you modified one entity, automatically it is going to set the entity state as right what update. So all these things are going to be happen automatically in the connected environment, right? And what about in disconnected environment? We need to set all these things manually. How we will do this manually? We'll see once we discuss the disconnected environment. So now you can see these are the different entity state, and based on the entity state, the corresponding database operation is going to be performed, right? So guys, one more thing I just need to tell you is, right? So before proceeding and before understanding the CRUD operation, is it a good programming approach, right, to enable the entity framework core logging, right? So what do we mean by entity framework core logging means, now whenever we right, execute our application code, what SQL statement is generated, when the SQL statement is generated, when the connection is open, right? All of the information, if you want to see, if you want to investigate, right, whether it is generating the code appropriately or not, if you want to see all these things, then you need to enable the entity framework core logging. So to enable the entity framework core logging, what we need to do is we just need to use the log2 method, right? So let us see how we can do this, right? So go to this entity framework core, right? So guys, remember here I have again compared to this hard coding the connection string, right? Because it is going to be a single line statement, right? But if you want, then you can also use the other one, right? Other means you can read the connection string from the app settings, right? So first of all, guys, to enable entity framework core logging, then you need to include this extension start logging namespace, right? And once you use this, once you install this logging namespace, then what you need to do is the way we are calling the use SQL server method, where you need to provide the connection string. In the same way, you need to call this log2 method, right? And this log2 method, right, basically it's going to right, this log2 method, you need to give two pieces of information. First one, where you want to log the right, where you want to log the data or information. Second, what level of information or data you want to log. So in this case, console.writeLine means what? That the console window, right? Whatever the black color screen is coming, there only I want to log the data. Instead of this, you can also create a method which is taking one string parameter. Inside that method, you can also log. You can also log to a text file, anything, anywhere you can write. But for simply purpose, I'm using this right console.writeLine. And the second one is at what level of information you want to log. Whether you want to log the info, whether you want to log the information, do you want to debug the trace information, error information, debug information, what exactly you want to log. So that information you need to provide. So if you go to this log level enum, then you will see the different the information that what you can log. So if you want to use only trace, then you can use this one whenever exception occur, right? Those in trace information, debug information, right? Information, warning, error, critical, none, right? So based on your requirement, you need to choose which option you need to use. And you can try this by yourself, right? Just change this trace debug information one by one and see what exactly happening. So in this case, right, what I'm going to use, I'm going to information. So basically what exactly the entity framework core is going to do whenever it generates an any SQL statement, and whenever it execute any SQL statement on the database, what SQL statement it generate and execute, that SQL statement it will show us. And by looking at the SQL statement, we can conclude, right, whether it is using the right appropriate SQL statement or not, right? So for that purpose, I'm logging this information, right? So once this is done, then what we need to do, right? We need to perform different operations, right? Let us try to understand how we can perform the create operations, right? So create operation, let us try to understand. Guys, for creating the create operations, we can use a dataset dot add method, or you can use the context class add method, right? So let us try to understand these things, right? For example, this is my object, right? This is my entity. So currently this entity is not being tracked by the context object. Why? Because we have not added this entity to the context object. Then what I'm doing, I'm creating the context object, you can say. And once I create the context object, then you can add the context object in many different ways. So basically three different ways. One of the option is to use the DbSet.add method. What is this context student? Students is nothing but your DbSet property. If you go to this definition of the student, then you will see it is a DbSet property. So I'm using this DbSet.add method, and to this add method, I need to pass the student, right, which you want to add. So once I add the student into this context object, now the context object tracking the student. And in this case, whenever you are adding an entity using the add method, means what? That entity is going to be in added state. Which state? Added state. Right, so we have discussed different entity state. In this case, this a new entity is going to be in added state. The same thing you can also use, right? Is the same thing you can also achieve using the add method of the context class. You can see I'm specifying add student, so generic type this is, and you can see this student name is padded, because based on this object it can infer the type. So based on this object it can infer the type as student. So if you want, right, you can use this overloaded version, or directly you can also pass, that is going to be work. So we have these three different options to add a single entity. Later I will show you, right, how you can perform the batch operations, right? Bulk, insert bulk, update bulk, delete, right? Everything is possible. And once we progress, then we'll discuss those things, right? So in this case, you can see the entity is added, and the entity is added means the entity is going to be in added state. And the context object tracking that the new entity is in added state. So if you want to check, right, what is the state before calling, and once this is in added state, right, then what you need to do, right? Added state means what? The entity is ranked by the context object, but that entity is not available in the database. Added means what? That entity is not added into the database, but that entity is tracked by the context object. And whenever we call the SaveChanges method, right, what exactly it is going to do is it will check what is the state of this entity. The new student entity state is added. So the entity framework code is going to generate insert SQL statement. For added state, it is going to generate insert SQL statement, and that insert SQL statement is going to be executed on the database. But guys, remember, as soon as which Umesh, please remove this thing. Don't type anything on the screen, right? Because I don't. Okay, let me clear this. So okay, so don't do it. What happening, Umesh? Why you are typing on the screen? Please don't do anything. Let me remove you. Remove, Umesh, I removed you. So guys, while I'm explaining, don't do anything on the screen because it is disturbing me. Okay, fine. So guys, remember, right? So see, the thing is that if I'm disturbing, the flow is going to be changed, right? So we have in this case, right? So what happening in the case of a step changes method, right? So once we call the step changes method, it will check the state of this entity, and if the state is entity in added state, it is going to generate the insert SQL statement. So basically, so if you want to check what is the entity state, then what you need to do, you need to use this entry method. We have already discussed. Using this entry method, we can set the entity state manually. How we are going to set the manually? that we will use in the case of a disconnected environment. But for now, right, what I'm going to do, I'm just making what will be the current entity state. And to do so, I'm using this context object to this entry method. I'm passing the entity and I just want to paste the state. So in this case, before SaveChanges method, the entity state is going to be in added state. But guys, tell me what will happen once the SaveChanges method is executed, right? So we have already discussed. We have already discussed the different entity states. So what are the entity states? Right? So we have already discussed the different entity state. So once the added state, once the data is being added, the entity state will be changed to unchanged. Right? From added, if the operation is successful, it will move to unchanged. Unchanged means what? Now the data in the context object and the data in the database is going to be same. Whenever the same data available within the context object as well as available in the database means what? The state is going to be unchanged. Clear, guys? Similarly, if we modify few properties, once we retrieve the data from the database, once we modify few properties, and then in that case, the state will be changed to modified. But whatever modification we have done with the context object, until and unless we are not calling the SaveChanges method, the data in the database is going to be different one. So in that case, the state is going to be modified. But again, once we call the SaveChanges method, right, then whatever modification we are doing within the context object, right? Those are going to be updated into the database. Means what? The data is going to be same. So whenever the data is same, right? Then what is going to be the state of the entity means unchanged. Now you guys tell me, right? Now you guys tell me. So in this case, so currently the state is added, right? Why added? Because this data is available within the context object, but not available in the database. But once we call this SaveChanges method, right, whatever data, right, having with this entity, the same data is also having in the database or not. Once you add this entity, means the same data is added into the database. Whenever there is a match, whatever data with the entity in our application, and if the same data is available in the database, means the entity state is going to be unchanged state. So in this case, once the SaveChanges method is executed successfully, then what will happen? The entity state will be changed from added to unchanged. Clear or doubt? Anybody having any question? They can ask me. Right? Why the entity state is changed from added to unchanged, right? Because the data is going to be same with the context object entity state as well as the same data is available in the database. As both are having the same data, the state is going to be unchanged, right? So now let me run the application and see whether it is working as expected or not. Clear, guys?
Yes, yeah.
So nothing is displaying. Okay, fine. Now let us try to understand this code. Say before SaveChanges, entity state is added. So before SaveChanges, entity state is added. This is the statement what we have written. And what state it is displaying? It is displaying the entity state was added. And after SaveChanges, right, what entity state is it displaying? After SaveChanges, it is displaying the entity state as unchanged. That means from added to unchanged. Why this? So this entity state unchanged means what? This is the current state, right? After the database is updated into the database, the state is also going to be updated automatically because this is because of the connected environment and because of the context object. So that is fine. We understand why the entity state is changed to unchanged. But now let us try to understand what SQL statement is generated. It is generated the insert SQL statement and whatever the properties you want to insert. And this is nothing but your parameter values, right? This is for the first parameter, second parameter, third parameter, fourth and fifth. And here you can see parameter 0 is of date time type. Parameter 1 is of right decimal type, scale precision, right? Parameter 4, right? Or is of this size is 4000 means it is a string type, right? So all the information you can see here, right? So this is how you are getting the data, right? What kind of what SQL statement is currently generated and what executed, right? You can see this is the statement being going to be executed on the database, right? Now instead of using right this log, uh, right? Let me try to add the info. Information is there. Let me try to write some other what log level. Trace debug information. Let me try to add the debug. Right, see what happening with the debug. Right, let me run the application once more. Right, so you can say with the debug what is happening, and every information is captured when the entity framework instance is created. Right, what entity state, right? DbContext started tracking student entity. Right, you can see this message. Right, now this context object tracking the student entity. Right, entity framework would generate a temporary value for the student student ID. Right, because why it is generating a temporary value? Because ID is going to be the primary key. That value is going to be generated automatically. And what entity framework or database provider is used? So that information you can see here. Right, so all these things are going to be displayed. Right, so if you are using debugging means step by step what happening in each line, right, each statement, that information it is giving you. Right, so basically what execute reader scalar, right, internally if you see they are using something called execute reader to read the data, execute right, so all these things you can see what database they are communicating with the, right, when the connection is closed. Right, you can see connection is closed when the connection is open. Right, all those informations are going to be stored here. Clear or not, guys?
Yes. Yeah.
Right, so if you want to check you can see this. Right, so basically they are at a different right um, log level. So whichever log level you just try the other one. If you want to show something whenever error occur, then you need to use error. Warning you want to display, you need to use warning. Right, information you want to display, you can use information. Right, so basically it's depend upon your requirement and whatever you want to do you can do this. Right, once this thing is done, right, then you can check the database whether the record is inserted or not. Already we have inserted few records yesterday, and let me show you whether the current record is inserted or not. Right, so go to the database, entity framework code DB1, that is what we are using, and then you just go and check this student table. Right, you can see this is the current date, current record what we have inserted now. So this is the information being inserted. Right, later I will show you how you can insert multiple right, more than multiple, right, how you can insert data to multiple different tables. Right, all these things we are going to discuss, don't worry. So once we perform the insert operation, then what we need to do, we need to understand the update operation. Guys, give me 1 minute. Okay. So guys, remember what exactly the update operation means. Now, once we fetch the data, then if we modify any of the properties value, then the entity framework will mark the entity state as modified. Right? Let me show you this example practically. Right. So guys, remember this is my context object, right? First of all, I'm checking, right? So basically, if you look at this, there is an object student whose ID is 1. So that information I want to fetch. And guys, here I'm using the find method. What exactly this find method is going to do is it will take the primary key as a value. So this will take the primary key as a value. And in this case, if I'm passing 1, that means that value will be considered as the primary key column value. And if that value is available, then it will return that record, right? So again, what is find method? What are the different options, right? We will discuss after in tomorrow session. Once we start discussing queries using entity framework code. So basically this find method, it is a method which is provided by the DbContext class. And this method is going to take the primary key, and if that key is available, it is going to return the data. And then what I'm checking, yeah, I'm checking whether this object is available, right? Is there any student available which ID is 1 or not? If it is available, then only go inside. And before making any changes, right? Before making any changes, what I'm trying to do is, so I'm trying to check the state of the entity. So guys, remember, once you fetch the data, right? At this point, what should be the entity state? So in this case, the database containing the data and this student entity containing the data is same or different?
Different.
How it is different? So in this case, you are just calling this find method, and it is going to return the data, and this student object going to contain the data, this information or something different?
No, same information, sorry, same information.
Same information. If both are having the same, the context object as well as in the database, then what should be the entity state in this case? Same
Unchanged.
means unchanged, right? So you can see at this point the entity state should be unchanged. Now entity framework tracking all the information. So in this case, you are changing the first name and the last name of the student entity. So once you make any single change, right? Once you made any single change, then what will happen? Now it will modify the entity state as what?
Modified.
It will mark the entity state as modified. Why? Because currently the student entity having the data different than the database. Whenever there is a difference, means the entity state will mark as modified. And once you call this SaveChanges method, then which SQL statement is it is going to generate? Insert, update, or delete? Modified state means it is going to generate the update SQL statement. So once you update the data, right, once the update statement is executed in the database, then the student entity data and the database data is going to be same or different?
Same.
Same. Same means in this case, if you once this execution is completed, then in this case, what it is going to print the entity state?
Unchanged.
Unchanged. Clear? So guys, remember another important thing that you need to remember. So now, how many properties are there in the student entity? Having student entity first name, last name, date of birth, height, weight, like many properties are there. But how many property value we are changing here? Two property. So the point that you need to remember in this case, whenever we are creating an update statement, right? Generally, if you are performing some kind of update operations, right? Then what you need to do? You need to write the storage procedure which is going to update all the properties value, and whatever properties values we are sending from the UI, whether it is same or different, it is going to update with the latest one, right? So in this case, the scenario is different. What is the different scenario? So the context object know which property values are being changed, right? So it is not going to include all the properties in the in the object statement. Only those properties are having different value. Those are going to be used in the object statement, right? And in the where condition, it is going to use the primary key. Based on the primary key only, it is going to update the data. But in the update case, in this case, it is going to check only two. It is going to use only two statements, right? Let me run the application and show you the code. Right? So see, so needs to observe this statement. So how many how many properties or how many column values it is updating? Two properties. Why? Because these are the properties which are having a different value, and then it is using that where condition, right? Where the student ID or based on the student ID, because this is the primary key, and based on the primary key, it is updating this two column value. So once this update statement is completed, if you go and check the database, then you can see the value is changed to Pratiksha. Right now. Now guys, tell me. Now, if I'm running the same application once more, what will happen? In this case, what should be the entity state?
Unchanged.
In this case, what should be the entity state?
Unchanged.
Unchanged. Why?
because that data is already present. Pranay, if I want to update with a null, then I have to set the value as null, right?
So that basically depends whether you are that column, right? What you are creating in the database is a nullable column or not. That is what it is going to check. If it is a nullable column, then no issue. It can accept a null value. If it is not a nullable column, then it will give some right runtime error. So
Okay, got
same.
it.
So this is a completely the same concept, right? Whatever constraint you have applied to your database columns, that is going to be applicable, right? So in this case, you need to understand one thing. So here I'm updating the values. So if I'm updating the first name and last name, in this case, what should be the entity state? That is what my question.
Unchanged.
Why unchanged? That is what I want to know.
Because both values are same in database and
Exactly.
T plus.
Exactly. So even though if you are updating some data, if the data is not different one, then the state is going to be same, right? Let me run the application and show you these things. Right? So you can say before update, and after save changes, right? And whenever the data in unchanged state, and if you call the save changes method, do you think that anything is going to be happen? If there is no changes, then why should he is going to update the data into the database? So in that case, it simply ignore the save changes method, and that is what you can see here. Only fetching the data by using the find method means one select statement is issued, and then you can see before updating, after updating, and after save changes, right? Everywhere that state is going to be unchanged. That is the important thing that you need to remember. Even though if you access the data from the database, and if you are updating the properties, but if you are updating the properties with the same value as the database, then in that case, it is not going to change the entity state. It is know what is the data stored in the database with this first name property, what is the data stored in the last name property, because it is in a connected scenario. The context object, we are working with the connected environment. Connected environment means it know what exactly the data stored in the database and what data you are storing in the entity state. And if the data is not changed, I'm not going to do anything.
Can
I'm not
upload
going
it?
to do a update operation into the database. Clear, guys? This concept is clear?
Pranay, but having one doubt here. For
Yes.
example,
Can you put
here
it?
we're setting,
Yes. Ask me.
yeah, here we're setting the first name as Pratik and last name is Sahil. If I'm
Yes.
sending the same object from the front end like MVC, then the rest of the properties will.
See,
In that
in
case,
that case, in that case also it is going to same, right? So if you are sending the data from the right, from where, from the right, what I can say, from the
MVC
UI, then you
front end.
need to set the entity state. But again, it is going to check whether the data, right, whatever you are fetching from the database and whatever data with the right entity state, whether same or not. If it is same, because if you are sending from the UI, definitely you will having that primary key value. Yes or no?
Yeah,
Right? And in that case, it is going to be in a disconnected environment. And again, right, once if you send the data, then it is going to check whether the entity, right, once you create an instance of the context class, then again you need to fetch the existing data, right, based on the primary key column, right? You need to first check whether that entity is available or not in the database. It is not like that you are updating one entity but that entity is not available in the database. That should not be the case. So in that case, you need to fetch the data from the database. Then you need to update the properties which might be going to be updated, right? It is not like that. I'm providing one update operation means I can update all the column values, right? So it is not. Suppose the created on or created by this thing, the things is going. It's not going to be changed whenever we are updating the data. Or some of the constant fields like the username you can't update, right? So based on the data available in the database, first of all you need to fetch, right? Like this you can say, for example, okay, let me do one thing to your concern. I'm creating one student object, student, right? So let me student std equals to new student, and let me assume the student id is going to be 1, and this is the first name I received from the right. This is the thing that what I have received from the UI. And then what I'm going to do is student from UI, right? And then what first I need to do, I need to check whether the student from UI, right, from Sorry. So you need to fetch the data from the student entity. Right. First of all, you need to fetch this thing. Then you need to check whether that student is existing or not. Yes or no. Right, and once it is exist, right, then what you need to do, we need to update, and it might be by sending some other, right. So in this case, the student having multiple properties information, first name, last name, date of birth, height, weight, standard, IT, but your requirement is that right, you are only allowing these two properties to be modified. So if you are allowing these two properties to be modified, then what you need to do, you just need to write this thing, student dot first name, student dot last name, right? So this is the change, and then you need to update this data into the database. This is the thing that what you are doing or anything else,
Right. Exactly. That is
right? Exactly. So in this case also, it is going to check the state. So in this case also, right, currently, if I run this application for the first time, it is going to update the data because the test and the test is not available in the database. Right, so you can see unchanged, then modified, then unchanged, that is fine. But if I run the application once more, then you will see the same data is already available in the database, so it is not going to update. This is the advantages of using entity framework. So in this case, it is not going to make a database call to the database as the entity framework core knows, as there is no updation is going to be happening into the database, because whatever the user wants to update, the same update state, right, data is already available in the database, right? So in that case, it is going to handle these things internal. Clear?
Sir, what is the purpose of entity state?
What is the purpose of entity state? See, so in this case, entity state purpose is nothing, right? So in this case, entity state purpose is nothing, right? So if you comment this thing, then nothing is going to be happen. And even whenever you are going to work in the real time application, you are not going to use this entity state and all these things. But what my intention is, how the things are going to be happen, right? If I'm not using this entity state and nothing is going to be shown, right? So can you tell me what exactly happening with the entity, what exactly the entity state, how it is moved from one state to another state, how the insert statement is going to be executed, right? When the insert statement is going to be created, when the update statement is going to be created, how the context object is going to identify these things because of this entity state. So based on this entity state, guys, because
Okay,
of this entity state only, it is going to generate the required SQL statements. Clear? So without, see, technically speaking, in this example, we are not going to write this statement in real-time application. I'm writing this entity state to make you understand what exactly the state of an entity is going to change from, right? When we are adding a new entity, what will be the state? When we are updating the properties of the existing entity, what will be the state? If I'm updating with the same value, the entity state is going to be changed. If it is not changed, right? If I'm calling the SaveChanges method, does it going to do anything, right? Those kind of things, if you want to understand, then definitely you need to understand entity state. Why I'm saying? Because, right, my fellow colleagues, right, who are having 10, 12 years of experience, right, they even do not know what exactly entity states, how exactly this insert statement is generated, when it is going to be generated, right, when the update statement is going to be generated, they do not know. To be frankly saying, right, right, those who are coming to this ASP.NET Core having ASP.NET MVC and entity framework knowledge, do you
yeah.
guys know what exactly the entity state means? How exactly the entity state tracking all the entities before coming to this session? Anybody having any idea about the entity state?
No, sir.
Right. But you are
Yes,
using entity framework.
yes, we have idea about this.
No, if you are having idea, then that is well and good. But most of the people, they do not know what exactly the entity state. How exactly do, right? Do you know, right? These things you should know. How exactly the entity state. What is the connected environment? What is disconnected environment? Right? If I'm creating if I want to attach this entity, right? I don't want to create an right. I want to attach this entity into the context object. I don't want to reach find method and nothing. I want to attach this entity to the context object so that it can track the entity. Is that possible? Yes, that is possible. How? That is what we are going to discuss one by one. Right. So basically, without understanding the entity state concept, you can't understand entity framework. right? How you will decide, right? By looking at the code, can you say it is going to generate the insert after delete statement? Yes. If you are having good experience, then you can tell, yes, in this case, it is going to generate insert statement. In this case, it is going to generate update or delete statement. But how exactly the things are happening behind the scene? That is what, if you want to understand, then you need to understand the concept entity states. How the state is changed from added to modified, from modified to unchanged, from unchanged to detached, right? All those things you need to understand. Clear, guys?
Yes, sir.
Right, so this is, see, if I want, then I can take a 1-day class or 2-day class. I can complete entity framework core with ASP.NET core web ambitious web API. Why I'm explaining? Because this is the important thing. You should know the architecture behind the scene. What exactly happening whenever I'm calling the step changes method? How or what SQL statement is generating? Right, that is what I'm going to show you. Because practically, right, theoretically is a different thing. Practically showing the concept is a different thing, right? If I say whenever we add the entity is in added state, and whenever we call the step changes method, the SQL insert SQL statement is generated and execute on the database. But saying the same thing is fine. But practically showing, yes, this is the entity state in added state. Once you modify the data, the entity state is changed to modified state. When you call the step changes method, this is the SQL statement being generated. Once the SQL statement successfully executed, the entity state is modified to this state. So practically saying and theoretically there is a huge difference, right? So if you see these things practically, then you will get better idea. This is the reason why I'm keep focusing on this entity state concept. Clear, guys? Any question, guys, from anyone? Okay, fine. So next, what we are going to discuss, we are going to discuss the delete operation. So can anybody tell me how we can perform the delete operations? Those who are having experience on entity framework, can they explain me how exactly you can use, right? What method you need to use to perform the delete operations, and what exactly happening to the entity state whenever you delete one entity from the database?
Remove method we have to use.
Sorry? Yeah, remove method is fine. What exactly happens? See, say deleting the record, you need to use the remove method. That is fine. But my question is that whenever I use the remove method, what will happen? If the entity is added in, if the entity is available in the database, then what will happen? If the entity you added into the context object, but that not added into the database, and you call the remove method, then what will happen? If the entity is added into the database, call the remove method, then what will happen? And when you call the step changes method, then what will happen? That is what my that is what I want to know. So if when you call the remove method, what will be the entity state?
Deleted.
Deleted, right? And once you call the step changes method, what will be the entity state?
Unchanged.
Change.
Sorry.
After perform the
Unchanged.
operation, it might be unchanged.
So once you once first of all you need to call the remove method, pass the entity which will mark the entity state as deleted. But that will only mark the entity state as deleted. But if you want to permanently delete that entity from the database, definitely you need to call the step changes method. Once the step changes method is executed successfully, then what will happen to the entity state?
Changed.
Sorry?
Deattach.
Unchanged the state.
Which state?
Deattach.
Detached. Why? Yes, detached state. Detached state means what? Means the entity is not being tracked by the context object, right? So basically whenever you don't want an entity to be tracked by the context object, you need to set the state as detached state, right? And whenever you delete one entity, right, either from the context object or from the database, in that case the entity state will be marked as detached, and in that case the entity framework core, right, the context object is no longer tracking that object, right? Let us try to understand these things with one example, right? Again, where we can perform this operation in many different ways, right? You can see right? So you can see, first of all, we need to delete one record. Whatever record we want to delete, first of all, we need to make sure that record is available in the database. And in that case, you can see I'm calling this by passing this ID value 1, and I'm using this one. The student is available, right? So not equals to null means the student is available. So before removing the student, I want to show the student state. So in this case, definitely the student, right? In this case, the state is going to be definitely unchanged. Why? Because whatever the student we retrieve from the database, and the student retrieved the student and the database entity both are going to be same. So the state is going to be unchanged. So we can remove the right entity in different ways, right? You can mark this method as remove. You can also call the remove method on the context object by specifying the type of the entity, or directly in this case, based on the data type, it will infer what will be the type of the object, right? So any of the options you can use, right? So both of all are going to be do the same thing. So in this case, once you call this remove method, then the entity state will be moved to deleted state. But in this case, the entity state will be deleted, but the actual deletion is not happening on the database. And whenever you call the SaveChanges method, then the entity is going to be deleted from the database. And once you call the SaveChanges method, right, once the entity is deleted from the database, then the state will be in detached state. Detached state means this entity is no longer tracked by the context object, right? So if you do any changes with this entity, then it is not going to be tracked, right? So let me run this application and show you whether whatever we explain, it is working as expected or not. So first of all, the entity state is before removing unchanged. Once you call the remove method, it is marked as a deleted. Then it executes the delete SQL statement, and after deletion, the entity state is changed to detached, right? So why I'm saying it is not being tracked, because once you update this, right, once you remove this statement, right, then what I'm going to do, I'm making this student dot first name, right? I'm providing some value, right? So I'm providing some value. So here I'm writing some value, right? Now, once this value, if it is being tracked by the context object, right? If it is being tracked by the context object, then it should display the entity state as what? So if it is displaying the entity state as modified, then means it is tracked by the right what? It is being tracked by the context object. If it is show the entity state as detached, means it is not being tracked by the context object. Because if we why I'm saying, because if we are doing any modification to the entity state, then definitely the entity state going to be modified. But as it is not being tracked by the context object, it is not going to display modified. It should display detached. Let me run this application and show. Right, so it is saying invalid student ID. Can anybody tell me why it is saying invalid student ID?
Because the record is deleted from the database.
Exactly, the record is already deleted from the database, right? So now if you see this, so instead of 1, let me pass 2. So I'm passing the value 2 and running the application one more time. Right, so you can see entity state after removing data, and I have written the same statement here. So after updating the value, again the entity state it is showing as detached. Means what? Means the entity is no longer being tracked by the context object. Now you might be have question, sir, if I want to track the entity later, how we can make sure? We'll see how we can do this in our upcoming sessions, right? So again, that is also possible to track this entity state again. Clear, guys? How you can perform the CRUD operation, means how you can retrieve the data like this, and how you can perform the insert and update and delete operations, right? For insert operation, you need to use add method. For delete operation, you need to use remove method. For update operation, you do not need to do any, you do not need to call any operator or any method, right? In that case, you just need to update the properties. And once you update the properties, automatically the entity is going to be tracked by the right context object. Whichever property value you updated, that is going to be tracked. So you do not need to call anything special for the update operations, right? But for add for insert statement, you need to call the add method. For the delete, you need to call the remove method. Clear, guys? Later, I will show you how you can also perform the bulk operations, because without performing the bulk operation, it is not right a good approach, right? So definitely, whenever we are going to work with real-time application, we need to perform some bulk operation. We will get the data from the Excel sheet. We need to update those data. We need to modify the data. We need to delete the data into the database, right? We are also going to discuss those things. Clear, guys? What exactly this? How you can perform the CRUD database operations?
Sir, what about soft delete?
See, there are two types of a delete. One is soft delete, another one is hard delete, right? So basically, in this case, if you see, I have deleted two records from the database,
Yes.
right? One is ID1, another one is ID2. So this is nothing but your hard delete,
Hard delete. Yes.
right? And what about soft delete? Suppose you create one property called is active in this database column, whose value is going to be either true or false, right?
Yes.
And based on the delete operation, if you are updating this property value, right? If this property value true means this record is active. If the property value false means the record is inactive. Then in that case, right, you need to this kind of operation is called as soft delete, right? And in the case of a soft delete, right, you do not need to perform the remove operation. What you need to do? You need to perform the update operations, right? This is nothing but your soft delete. So you have to create one column, and that column value is going to identify whether the record is active or the record is inactive. And in that case, you do not need to do, right? You do not need to call this remove method. Instead of remove method, you just need to set the property value as false and update the data. That's it. Clear? What is the meaning by soft delete and hard delete?
Yes.
Right? And in most of the real-time application, you are going to use this soft delete, right? We never going to delete the data. We just need to mark the data as active or inactive.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
Right. So now let us try to understand this entity state. We have already discussed, but let us try to understand one more time. Okay, already 8:23. Okay, we'll continue this discussion tomorrow. Okay, I have some other work that what I'm going to do. We'll continue. We'll continue. Again, guys, in this weekend, we are also having class on Saturday. Any question, guys, from anyone? How to perform the database CRUD operation using
Hello, sir. Hello.
Yes.
My question is there. Sometimes a few extra columns may be there in the database table. Okay. For example, I'm having a date of birth for a student, and there is a age column. Then we will be able to. Can we handle that age using entity framework?
So already we have discussed, if you want to handle the age means the age should be greater than 18, something like this, right?
No, means my question is calculation of age. Means many few operations we do in database. So,
Right. So that is so calculation of age means based on this date of birth, you need to calculate the age of the employee, right? Or age of the student. That is what your question.
But that property is not in the student entity.
Hey, that is also possible. So once you discuss the projection, right? So basically, what is your requirement based on this date of birth? You need to calculate the age, and that is what you want to display into the UI, right? If I'm not wrong. Right. So in that case, see, guys, remember this. This model class what we are using. This is tightly bound with WOM. This is the model class. This is used to work, right? This is same as the database table, right? So in that case, what we need to do is, right? So whatever question you are asking, that is right. Basically, that kind of scenario will come into the picture whenever you are working with ASP.NET Web API, right? Because in ASP.NET Web API, we need to calculate the age and we need to return that value to the client. So in that case, you need to use something called the DTOs, right? Data transfer object. So in that case, in that case, what we need to do, we are not going to return the student entity data to the UI. So what we generally need to write, we need to write this student DTO or some student so something like this, right? And in that case, whichever column property value you want to return, right? For example, in this case, created on, created by, right? Modified on, modified by. These columns are not required to show in the UI. So you can remove those columns, and you want to display that age column, right? So you can create a property here, public integer age, right? Something like this. And whenever you are projecting the data, right? Whenever you are projecting the data, you can project the data to this, right? Student DTO. All the properties values you can store as it is. And whenever you are projecting the data to this age property value, you can calculate the age and project the data to this column, right? And then you need to return this TTO to the client instead of the student class, right? We will discuss what that is also, how you can project the data. So you have any experience into LeanQ,
No, we are not using, sir.
right? So basically, say guys, remember I'm saying again and again, without LeanQ, entity framework is not incomplete. Without LeanQ, entity framework is incomplete. See, if I'm saying, if you are creating a database, do you think that only insert, update, delete statement are going to be used? Without select statement, do you think that your application is going to be completed?
No, sir.
Right. So if you want to fetch the data, if you want to display the data, if you want to perform the joining operation, grouping operation, sorting operation, projection operation, right? Filtering operation, then what you need to do? Definitely you need to write some select statement. But here we are not going to write any select statement. Then we need to find a way which is going to generate the select statement. And that way is nothing but your LeanQ to entities. LeanQ to entities. So without LeanQ, right? So for example, if you look at this, here I'm using this find method. So without using this find method, can I use LeanQ method to get the data? Right? Suppose I'm going to write, I don't want to use find method. So I want to use LeanQ. So what I need to write, dot where student such that std dot student id equals to 2, right? Dot, right? Instead of this one, you can convert this to let method, right? So one particular student, so in that case, you can make use of this find or a default method, right? So you can also write like this thing. So what is this? This is a method which belongs to system.LeanQ namespace, right? If you go to the definition, then you will see this method belongs to system.LeanQ namespace. So if you do not know what are exactly LeanQ, then you will face many difficulty to understand this concept, entity framework. So I would suggest, I would recommend it, right, each and everyone to learn the LeanQ, because without LeanQ, nothing is going to be possible. Because tomorrow, right, I'm going to discuss LeanQ to entity storage. So in that case, I'm going to discuss many, right, different LeanQ methods. And if you do not know what are exactly these methods, right, how you can use them to fetch or get the data, then you will find it you will find it difficult, because you should know what is the statement from X in context dot student where select etc etc. You should know all these things, right? So for example, if you are going with the joining operations, ordered by, and yeah, see in this case, what I'm saying, the question you asked, right? So currently the student are containing this part name, last name, and a height. But I don't want. I want to create something like this. I can create a anonymous object or a named object here. Instead of student, I can provide student TTO, and here I can calculate the age property value, and that student is going to be returned. So you should know all these things, right? Because these are the things which we are going to use very frequently, right? Because if you are developing any real kind applications, then you should aware about entity framework. Entity framework means you should know what are LeanQ, you should know what is repository design pattern along with the unit of work, right? Without repository design pattern, unit of work, repository means generic, non-generic, and mixed. LeanQ means all the LeanQ methods, right? How you can write query using LeanQ, right? Until and unless you do not know all these things, you will find it difficult, right? to understand the concept. Why I'm saying, see, whenever I'm going to explain whatever example and I'm going to take, I will explain the code. But that is not what I can say. That is not all. Apart from this, many LinQ queries, many LinQ methods are available. Those things you need to do practices. In this case, what is required from the entity framework core point of view, whatever examples I'm going to take, those examples definitely I'm going to explain. But you should explore more into LinQ. And this LinQ is not related to your entity framework, right? Not related to ASP.NET Core MVC or ASP.NET Core ABP. It is already available in our .NET framework, right? You can use the same concept here also. Clear, guys?
Yeah.
Yeah. So if you guys want to learn LinQ, right, then just go to my YouTube channel. I have right recorded sessions of my LinQ tutorial, right, training session. I have uploaded there. You can look at there. Else, you can also right go to my course, right, .NET course, and you can check the LinQ tutorial. So what are LinQ? How exactly, right? You can say what is the architecture, different ways to write, what is query syntax, what is method syntax, right? What are all the different methods available that you can use to write query, right? So all these things you can understand there, right? So I would suggest please go and check this. Okay. Any question, guys? Anybody having any more questions?
Yes,
So
sir.
it means, sir, that we will not be able to calculate age, right? Because with the help of entity framework, means we have to add that property in the student entity first.
See, first of all, you just tell me, without any property, how you can store the age column value? Where you will
Right,
store the age
right,
column value?
right. We have to calculate
Right?
and then we have to pass it, right?
Obviously, without calculating, without any kind of additional logic, we can't calculate the age. So if we are calculating the age, that's fine. Then we need to store that at some property. Then definitely we need to create a variable. Again, there are two approaches, right? And again, I don't want to add that property within this student or within this class. Why? If I'm adding that property within this class, and if later if I'm going to update the EDMX, sorry, I'm saying EDMX. If I'm going to update the migration, again that new column is going to be added into the database. That is what I don't want. So in that case, what is the solution? You need to, sorry, in that case, you need to create a DTO, and where you need to add the properties, what exactly you want to return to the client. And this is your original object, right? This is the right model class, which is going to be similar to your database.
Okay, fine, sir.
Yeah. Okay. Anyone? So someone asking another question?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Yes, I wanted to know if you would show us multi-tenancy in EF Core.
So I will check whether I will able to deliver that or not, because already right multi-tenancy. Okay, okay, I will add that.
All right, thank you.
So but why I'm saying, see, always my thought process is that I will deliver my best, right? And don't think that someone is going to deliver 100%. See, if someone is going to deliver 100%, then what you will learn from yourself. So my intention is I will deliver 90% of the same concept. 10% you try to you try to learn by yourself, right? So that is the good thing, because if you are depending, if you depend always on someone else, then what you learn by yourself. So first of all, you sometimes you also need to try to solve some of the problem by yourself. So once you solve the problem by yourself, right, then you will understand what exactly the things are happening behind the scene, how exactly this is working, right? Until and unless you are not debugging, you are not writing the code, you are not understanding the code line by line, right? You are not understanding the business logic, you are not understanding what exactly this built-in methods or whatever code we are using, then how you will understand the application, right? So you need to understand the things first, right? So that is what my intention is, because this is the reason why you can see I'm providing many real-time examples. So whatever the right concept we discussed, Fluent API. So Fluent validation is good. So I'm taking 2 classes, and again I'm providing at least 5 to 7 real-time example to practice by yourselves, right? So once you do practices again and again, if you are doing multiple different kind of examples, then only you will be able to understand the concept in a better manner. And if you are limited what I'm providing, then your knowledge is going to be limited, right? Suppose, for example, I'm creating the student entity with these properties. And if you are going to create the student entities with this same set of properties, then what is the meaning? So in this case, if I'm using integer, string, decimal, float, you need to introduce Boolean type. You need to introduce byte type. You need to introduce GOID type, data type, right? So once you introduce those kind of types, if I'm using your question mark, you need to try to learn. If I'm putting question mark, then what is happening? If I'm removing this question mark, then what is happening? What changes is getting, right? So once you do those kind of changes by yourself, right, then you will understand the concept better than if you are only stick to the document or the things whatever I'm providing, right? So you also need to try do some R&D kind of things, right? So that is what we are doing, right? We are getting the document from MSTN, but once we get the document, then we start doing some kind of changes, some kind of R&D kind of research and development, right? We are changing this, what happening? If I'm changing that, then what happening, right? So that is what the process of learning, right? Whenever you are trying to, whenever you are taking a session, right? If you are taking training from someone, whether from me or anyone else, don't stick with the training material or training sessions. Try to learn something new, something advanced in the sense the same example, but do it in a different manner. So if I'm providing 5 properties, try to make that as a 10 properties. Right. Once you make 10 properties, right, whenever you are going to develop any real kind of application, then you will understand if I'm going to create a product class, then what should be the properties of that class? That what you need to decide only. No one is going to tell add this product ID, product SKU, product code, right? Product name, product category, description, right? Images, all these things. That what you need to decide. What should be the properties name? If you give something new, something interesting, then definitely that will be going to be appreciated by your manager or someone else, right? So, and that what you will only going to be achieved if you are modifying your example. Suppose in this case, I'm giving student ID, first name, last name, date of birth, height, weight, and the standard. Add few more properties, right? Add few more properties, section, class, branch, right? The registration number, roll number. Like this, you can add many different kind of profile photo, right? University name, everything you can add, and then try to say whether it is a regular student or irregular student is regular, right? So course fee, all these things you can add, and you can manage all these things, right? So that is what you need to do. Clear, guys?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So this is how you should learn. But I can see most of the student are even not getting time to complete the recorded session, right? Those who are waiting and they are just calling me, sir, can you make the 4-day session? That is fine. But the thing is that even though if I make the 4-day session, then also you will face the same problem. If you are not completing the session in the 2-day itself, if you are attending the session today, whatever we explain in today's session, that what you need to complete today itself only. If you are taking today to tomorrow or day after tomorrow, then definitely you are be in far behind. Right? That is what I need to tell you. Okay, guys. Any question, guys, from anyone? Thank you, guys.
Thank you.